people should not be preparing the next stage of the economy. They should be getting subpoenas. You know, half of them come from firms which were doing all kind of shady accounting practices and fudging on taxes and figuring out ways to, so what are they doing here? Well, that's the way it is. The people who destroy the economy are the ones who are now being called upon to do something to it. What can any rational person expect them to do? You know, presumably patch it up somehow so it works, you know, gets back to working in their interest, but not carry out the significant changes that would be necessary for it to work in the public interest. Since the financialization of the economy in the 1970s, we have had the worst period in American economic history for the majority of the population. There were no wars, you know, no depressions, but real wages for the majority stagnated, or in the Bush years actually declined. It's no reason why that should happen. Productivity went up. Where is it? Also, benefits declined, social indicators declined. For the general population, it's been a pretty bad time. The Reagan as a cult, you know, so there's all kind of talk about the wonderful growth and free market and so on. Reagan was the most protectionist president in post-war American history. He doubled protectionist barriers, kept calling in the Pentagon and others to try to rescue backward American management. Government grew under Reagan, and it had the lowest growth rate since the Second World War. But it doesn't matter. The myth is what matters. However, people know that something went wrong, and under Bush got even worse. There was a little bubble at the end of the Clinton years, but it was a bubble. It was a tech bubble burst. Something like that will probably be reconstructed if there's no popular input into programs. Well, I think that's about what we, I mean, there are some interesting things to check. I mean, Obama ran on, he did have a couple of campaign positions. One of them was the Employee Free Choice Act, the right, which significantly extends the, the right. Okay, the right of workers to unionize, as most of them want to do. Well, that's kind of disappeared since he got in. There's been no mention of it. Rahm Emanuel was asked about it, and he said, well, not on the agenda right now. That's a rough view of what's on the domestic scene. If you look on the international scene, I'm talking too long, so I won't go into it, but you can bring it up if you like. But just one word. I don't usually agree with Condoleezza Rice, but in this case, I think she's probably on target. She wrote an article in which she predicted that the Obama administration on foreign affairs would be essentially a continuation of the second Bush administration. Now, if you look at the two Bush administrations, they were somewhat different. I mean, the first one was violent, arrogant, abusive. You know, it sank American prestige to its lowest point in history. Even allies couldn't tolerate it. And that's no good for the guys who own the country. They don't want that. Also, kind of every catastrophe after catastrophe in international affairs. So they don't like that. And the most extreme characters were mostly thrown out. So Wolfowitz, Rumsfeld, Feith, Pearl, they're all gone. I mean, they couldn't throw out Cheney because he is the government. You know, Bush is his advisor or spokesman or something. So he stayed on, but most of the rest left. And it was more mild and moderate and a little bit more forthcoming, a little bit more toward the center. So she could be right. It may be pretty much an extension of the second Bush administration. At least we don't see any evidence to the contrary yet. Well, I'll stop there.
Professor Chomsky. We'll begin the question and answer period. So if anyone who's interested in asking a question wants to can ask questions in an alternating fashion until about 6 p.m. So anyone who's interested, come on down. Don't be shy. And it can be about anything, just to let you know. It's not limited.
Mr. Chomsky, a little while ago when you were talking about Bolivia, you alluded to some sort of censorship or blindness in the way things are perceived in the United States. What effect do you think the Internet, which was integral in Mr. Obama's campaign, what effect will the Internet have on perceptions of international events in the U.S.?
Internet has a big effect. As you may know, there's a kind of the Internet is an interesting phenomenon. Like almost the entire economy, advanced economy, the Internet comes out of the state sector. It doesn't come out of entrepreneurial initiative and consumer choice or any of that stuff. That's ideology. It was in the state sector for about 30 years before it was handed over to private enterprises about 10 years ago. And that's typical of the advanced sectors of the economy. People talk about we're moving towards socialism if you take over shares in the banks or something. I mean, that's a joke. First of all, it has nothing to do with socialism. But secondly, it's a joke because of the way the whole manufacturing system works and has for a long time. It's based on the state sector, crucially, the Internet too. But the Internet does have it's very hard to control. So you can find anything you like on the Internet pretty much. However, and there's a battle going on about Internet freedom. There are a few ways to get into the Internet, a few portals that are privately controlled. And the question is whether they will be permitted to use their control to differentiate among users. So if you want to go to the sites they like, you get there fast. If you want to go to the sites you like, devious thing, don't get there. And that's a live struggle right now. And there'll presumably be a congressional battle about it. But for the moment, the Internet is essentially uncontrolled, so you can get a lot of things on it. And that does make a difference. In fact, if you wanted to, you could have found out what I described about the UNASUR endorsement of Morales and his response. But, it's a little bit like, if you're a scientist, suppose you're a biologist. A good biologist is not someone who reads every paper in his field. You couldn't do that. It would totally swamp. A good biologist is someone who has developed a kind of a framework of understanding so that he or she knows what to look for. So you don't just get buried in meaningless nonsense. And it's the same when you're trying to talk about social and political affairs, human affairs. I mean, if you know what's going on in Latin America, you would know to look for the data, for the evidence on the Santiago meeting and what happened. But you have to know a lot to do that. And individuals, we're a very atomized society. That's part of the technique of controlling people, is atomization. That's why organization is so important. If you're alone, it's very hard to figure out what to do. Same if you're a biologist. That's why in the sciences people work together cooperatively. If you're part of an organization that's concerned with Latin America, let's say, you'd sort of know what to look for and you'd find these things out. And the same's true on other issues. I mean, take what just happened the first part of January, the Israeli attack on Gaza, backed by the U.S. In fact, it was basically a U.S. attack. They're using U.S. arms illegally and U.S. support and so on. There was live television reporting from Gaza, 24 hours a day. One channel was in Gaza giving live information. And in over 100 countries, people were seeing it and getting infuriated by what they saw. But one of the countries where you didn't see it is the United States. Now, there's no law that says you can't film, you can't run Al Jazeera, but it works out that way. That's the way power is distributed, so you don't get to see it. So people here got sort of fragments of what was happening, but no sense of what most of the rest of the world is seeing. Now, you could do it on the Internet, but you had to know to look, and you had to know where to look and so on. It's the same question. So yeah, the Internet